Hi, and welcome to this webinar by the Qualified Adjunct. How will I be paid as an adjunct? In this webinar, we're going to explore various compensation methods. So for our presenters, we have Dr. Kenja Sabri, who is an HIM consultant in health information technology with over 10 years of experience in higher education, including instructional design, and was an academic chair and serves as an adjunct professor since 2011. And there's also Dr. Nicole Coatman, who's also an HIM consultant with over 10 years of higher education experience, concentrated in online instruction, online course development. And she currently serves as a professor and program manager and is also serves as an adjunct. So let's first talk about what is an adjunct professor. So an adjunct professor is a part-time instructor, usually on short-term contracts. They often work at multiple institutions, and as an adjunct professor, um, they are not eligible for a tenure track, and they have access to limited employee benefits. So let's talk a little bit about the importance of adjunct faculty. Adjuncts form a large portion of teaching staff. Part-time, non-tenure track instructors, most of whom are adjuncts, now count for about 47% of all higher ed faculty in the United States versus roughly one-third tenured or tenure track faculty. In two-year colleges, that figure is even higher. Nearly 70% of faculty are part-time at public community colleges. This prevalence means adjuncts deliver a substantial share of courses across disciplines. Hiring adjuncts is more cost effective for institutions because adjuncts are typically paid per course with lower benefit costs. They allow colleges to staff courses without the long-term salary benefit commitments of full-time hires. So in essence, adjuncts, when it comes to benefits, they're not receiving medical or dental or any type of pension or 401k retirement, right? These institutions are paying into Social Security on behalf of their adjuncts, and sometimes they may opt not to do that and to have their own investment account.
Great point, Dr. Coatman. I'm glad you mentioned that. So I like to encourage adjuncts, right? If your institution doesn't have those type of benefits, then that's something that you want to establish on your own and contribute to, especially if you don't have full-time employment.
Exactly. So let's get into how are adjuncts paid. Adjunct compensation can vary across institutions and be influenced by several factors, like degree level, teaching experience, and course type. Our goal is to help you make sense of this so you can feel confident and informed in this role. So here are some factors that affect pay. So as I mentioned, rates vary significantly based on institution type. So meaning public versus private and community college versus university. Then there's the degree level, undergraduate versus graduate courses, or the adjunct's degree level. Instructors with terminal degrees are typically paid more. So there's kind of this hierarchy when you look at it in terms of the instructor's degree, right? So that terminal degree, so you're talking about your PhDs, your EDDs, your DHSCs, those are all your terminal degrees, and that's where you're going to make the most amount of money with those types of degree. And then you have your master's plus 30 coming down that ladder, right? And so these are faculty members who have a master's degree, but they also have at least 30 credit hours towards a doctoral degree. And then you have faculty who typically just have the master's degree. So they're kind of at the lower rung when it comes to that salary rate. And then there's the discipline. Some fields like STEM or business may offer slightly higher rates. Um, Hard to fill, which will show you an example of this so you can see the difference. That's another factor that will affect pay. So hard to fill positions you may come across for areas such as nursing, typically something that's like clinical or maybe even STEM, just because the nature of the certifications and credentialing needed by the instructor to teach the class is generally hard to come by. It's hard to get people who have the experience but also the education, right? Because they're out in the industry. And so trying to get them to come into education to teach, even if it's part-time, can sometimes be difficult because of the pay. And then lastly, there's experience and credentials. While less impactful than for full-time faculty, it can sometimes play a minor role for adjunct faculty. Okay, so let's look at the common form of compensation. First, we have per course. So here on this slide, we have a couple of examples. The first is from SNHU. They offer the following standard compensation. $2,000 per 8-week undergraduate course, and then $2,500 per 10-week graduate course. And so this may vary for the program. So, for example, the nursing program, they have a separate compensation structure, and undergraduate and graduate adjuncts are paid biweekly and are considered W 2 employees. So, that's another thing to take into consideration. Depending on the institution, you may be considered a W 2 employee, or you could be considered a 1099 employee. And if you're considered a 1099 employee, that means you don't have any taxes taken out of your paycheck. So you want to keep that in mind when it comes time to file your taxes, or if you want to consider maybe paying taxes quarterly. So another example is of DeVry, who's offered the following standard compensation. Visiting professor is based on degree, credit hours taught per 8-week session, and location. In addition, DeVry University does not guarantee any specific number of work hours or assignments, which may vary based on the university's needs and discretion. The pay may vary in most states from 1,500 to about 2,600 per 8-week course.
All right. So Dr. Copeman, is it safe for me to jump in?
You sure can.
Okay, all right. So we're going to share some contract examples, what you could expect, maybe, right, if you or when it's time to accept an adjunct opportunity. So here are two examples. One is on the left for Dr. Copeman. As you can see, that the contract breaks down what course it is, the course credit hours, what term it's being offered, term start, term end date, and then the base compensation for this role. Okay. It also talked about a new faculty training stipend, right, for 250, totaling $3,010 for that contract. And then Dr. Copeman, did you mentioned this was sent via email, right? So you had to accept the contract?
Right, yes.
Okay, perfect. So the other example is mine, and it's a more recent one where I'm hoping to showcase that some schools will have an automated system when you are offered a course or a contract. They'll send you an email and it'll give this information. Again, you can see here how it has the name of the course, the work period. So this I thought was interesting because this work period is a little outside of the semester, meaning that it starts a week before because you're also paid for course preparation, okay, through the end of the term and or through the grading weeks. Okay, that's what it explains. So class will end and then you'll have a couple days to submit those final grades. So they pay you through that period as well. Okay, so you can see when the course actually starts and how the work period starts about 7 days before. So when this contract was offered, you have to log into their portal to accept or deny the contract. And while I'm here, I want to quickly say that when you do deny the contract or you choose not to accept the contract, this particular institution will ask you why, right? Does it interfere with your personal schedule? Is it, is it a conflict? Are you just not available? Are you on vacation and things like that for their own tracking purposes, or to see if you need a break in between teaching classes? So I thought that that was pretty helpful as well. So you can kind of convey your preferences to them for them to take into consideration. All right, so the next one is going to be per credit hour. So we have two examples here for you. The first is the University of Maryland Global Campus. So Dr. Copeman talked a little bit about terminal degrees, right? So you can see how the University of Maryland, they showcase their pay ranges based on whether someone, it says instructor, right? So no terminal degree, you'll start at the step one, right? So it shows that there's step one through step 11. So you can see that pay range there per credit hour, but then you could also see what it looks like if you are an assistant adjunct professor, an associate adjunct professor, with or without terminal degrees. So the ranges are pretty similar, but if you notice, like that step one starts at about $800 and it looks like it can go somewhere between or 1,000 to $1,300. So Dr. Copeman, I don't know if you can share your experience about the different adjunct tiers.
So, yes. So, at my current institution, we don't have like tiers for our adjuncts in terms of like their titles and how that relates to their degree and like their pay. It's based off of their degree, period. So, um, if it's a master's, master's plus 30, and then a PhD or a terminal degree. And there may be a slight difference if they're teaching in a different part of the college, such as I believe, like if they're doing like the high school or GED courses, that was a separate salary. But for the most part, it's based off of your degree.
Okay, thank
Which
you. And
kinda
I,
helps to sorry, just to, like, simplify things for
it does.
both parties, the institution and the person, because even with the titles for adjunct professors, like, so this is new, I've heard of it, the assistant adjunct and the associate adjunct, and then just adjunct professor. So, depending on the institution, like at my institution, you're an adjunct professor, but then University of Maryland Global, there's further distinction. So if you don't have a terminal degree, then you're just an assistant professor, right? Or an instructor.
Yes, absolutely. And I've seen this at some of the other universities where they'll start you off. If you're a new adjunct, you would be an assistant adjunct professor, and you typically stay in that role for a certain period of time. It might be 0 to 2 or 0 to 3 years, and then you get promoted to that associate adjunct. So I've seen a couple institutions that do it that way, so you can work your way through the ranks. But again, I'm not really sure how much financial if there's any financial incentives to, that hierarchy. Okay.
Right. So I would say don't get too hung up on the title of
I
your
agree. Yeah.
adjunct professor, right? Don't
Right.
get too
Right.
hung up on
We're all the same.
it.
Right. Okay. And then the College of Saint Scholastica, their compensation, um, it starts at $1,020 per credit for undergraduate courses, and then it goes to $1,112 for undergraduate courses after 40 credits are taught within a 5-year period. So I thought this was an interesting distinction, right? So the more courses that you teach over time, your pay does increase per credit hour. Okay. And then the other one is says 1352 per credit for graduate courses.
And Dr. Kendra, just to, add my 2 cents, I think what the College of Saint Scholastica is doing is actually good because it's a way to retain their
I
adjunct
agree.
professors, right? Because the fact they're saying that after 40 credit hours means they want you to stick around, like they want to keep you, which makes
Yeah,
sense because if anyone has ever, recruited adjuncts and onboarded them and oriented them and helped them get started, it's a lot of work.
it
So
is.
I really like that they do this, to see they're investing long term into you, and and they want you to invest long term into the college as well too.
Yeah, I like that. And as adjuncts, it's rare that you have something to really strive toward, right? Because we're not striving to a tenure track, right? So, and this is a way that you want to strive to at least teach more than those 40 courses so that you can get that incentive. So that's really cool. So here's another example. So Dr. Coatman kind of mentioned most of these things already, but this allows you to kind of see how it's laid out by degree. Okay. So this particular example, it talks about if you look at lower division, so it's broken down by lower division rates per credit hour, right? And then you have the upper division rates per credit hour. So for the associate's degree, so it's rare that in higher education, people are still allowed to teach with an associate's degree. So, more than likely, these people, they may not be doing this anymore, but these people are probably grandfathered in. Okay. Or it might be a particular field that doesn't require higher level education. So this is going to be rare, but as you can see, it starts off at that 615. However, Dr. Coatman mentioned hard to fill, right? So if a position or a department is having a tough time finding adjuncts, right? They might offer that hard to fill rate, and that hard to fill rate is almost double the compensation, right? So you can see that as it's reflected for associate, bachelor's, and master's degree. And then for doctoral degree, it is like half, right? So per credit hour would be 854, and then a hard to fill would be 1678. So at this particular school, they did make all of the healthcare programs hard to fill. Okay, because they weren't just having problems in nursing and EMS, but also HIT and some of the other healthcare, PT, all of that kind of stuff. So I thought that was nice. And then if you're teaching for upper division, right, bachelor level courses, typically, I thought this was interesting because it says you could have a bachelor's degree, but as we mentioned in a previous webinar, right, you should have a degree higher than the degree program in which you're teaching for. So if you're teaching for a bachelor's program, you need to at least have a master's and higher. Okay. So that master's is 921 per credit hour, the master's plus 30 that Dr. Coatman mentioned before. There's master's plus 30, but then they also have a bachelor's plus 62, right?
Mhm.
Which is the equivalent. Okay. They make 986 per credit hour, and then that doctoral rate is 1,053 per credit hour. So something else that I found to be interesting is there is a rate for someone that was nominated or selected to be distinguished faculty, right? So if you are a distinguished faculty member, you're getting paid $2,678 per credit hour, which is significantly higher than everybody else.
But again, that gives you something to
I
strive
was, yeah,
towards because,
yes,
again, it's about
absolutely.
retaining good adjuncts, right? I mean,
Right.
$2,600 per credit hour.
Right.
You think
You're
like
teaching.
think about that. You think most classes are 3 credit hours. Like,
Right. Right.
you're talking what, about
For
$7,000?
one class. For one class. Yeah, one class. And that could be an 8-week class, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, that's huge. So I also thought this was interesting that there is specific compensation based on industry certifications. So this was a really good example that if you are teaching that community college certificate for IT, there is a course rate for that. So instructors for courses, and they give you specific courses at the college. And you could always look these up and see what the titles are, right? And see how that may translate, or if another school near you offers that type of course, right? But these particular courses prepare students for that IT security exam. So they're saying if you are an adjunct and you have that certification, you're going to be paid $1,200 per ECH. So again, that credit hour, based on the credit hour. So another one is the project management, applied project management, and this is for the bachelor's course. So if you're someone who has that PMP certification from PMI, right, you're going to get paid that $1,072 per credit hour. So that's interesting too. And I love to see how these certain certifications is going to help you earn more money um, in the educational fields. Okay. All right, so here are hourly examples. Okay, so this particular school, as Dr. Coatman mentioned, it is paid based on degree level. So as you can see, but this is a per hour rate, right? So there will be time. Oh, no. So um, if you are at the bachelor's level, or if you have a bachelor's degree, right, you're going to be paid $44.76 an hour, master's degree 48, and then that doctoral degree $52.49 per credit hour. Okay. So Dr. Coatman, do you know how the hours are typically calculated?
Ooh, see if I can remember that formula. Um,
Okay.
it it's credit hours and the number of students. And so I
Oh,
think
gotcha. Okay.
credit hours times the number of students, and then that's divided by the number of weeks in a term. I think that's how the formula goes. I think.
Okay, all right, that sounds good. I
Yeah.
had someone mention to me before, like, oh, well, should I be tracking my time? And I'm like, no, you don't have to track
Um,
your time, right? It's a set, it's a set formula. So that's kind of nice too. So
mm,
you don't have to worry about, managing your time in that way. Another one after hourly rate is that per student rate. So there's going to be times where classes will have low enrollment, and the school or the department policy may be to pay you by student. Okay, so this happened to me once for a course with less than 10 students. I want to say I had about 7 students. So the department decided to pay me $100 per student. Every school is going to be different. I've seen schools reduce the ECH, which is the credit hours, right? So if it's a 3 credit hour, they're going to pay you not necessarily 3 credits for that class because you don't have a full class, but they may pay you two, they may pay you 1.5 or something like that, or they would convert the class to an independent study. So it's a little bit more hands off for you, so that they could adjust that compensation because you don't have a full class.
right.
So those
And
are rare instances.
yeah, and one thing I would like to add to that, you also want to keep in mind the amount of work you have to do in prepping the class and in facilitating the class, right? Depending on the institution. When I started adjuncting, I adjunct for profits, and you don't have to do any prepping. It that you get put in the class a few days before to familiarize yourself with the course and the course content, but there's no prepping. You don't have to build everything. Everything is done for you. You just literally facilitate the class and you
Show up.
grade and you respond to emails, right? So even in a case where it's a small class like the 7 students, you're if you're just being paid by the student, and but you're also not having to do any prep, it's just you grading and responding to emails and helping students, then the pay may fit what you're doing, right?
Right,
But then
right.
but if you're having to import in your course content, do the course schedule, put in due dates, and set up all of this stuff, publish your course, right? Then it may not be equivalent to the work that you're doing, right?
Right.
That's a discussion that we have all the time, right? Like I'm doing the same work regardless if it's one student or 30 students, right? If you're
Bingo.
to put the course together versus it already being set up for you and you're just facilitating it.
Right. That's true. And I think that's a great point and something that people should definitely look out for.
Mhm.
Okay.
And I know we mentioned payments or being paid biweekly. I think we're going to get to it.
Okay. Yeah. But go ahead. You can say what you need to.
So I was thinking because I know we talked a lot about, being paid biweekly, but there are some cases where you may get paid either once a month or dare I say at the end of the semester. So
Yeah, so I think you gotta plan for that. So
Mhm.
I don't think I ever so your example, you said you got a lump sum, right?
Yeah, one of them, my first teaching, it was a lump sum at the end of the semester. And I didn't care because it was online. I mean, I didn't have anything else better to do. I didn't have to, like, there was no money that I had to shell out. So I was like, okay.
Right, right. But that's important to know because I need to know is there some waiting time in between, right?
Right.
Or again, if you accept a contract and it turns out to be biweekly payments, you just need to know what to expect.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's it. All right, so I want to share some payment confessions that we had come in from a couple different adjuncts. Okay. So, comments and testimonials about pay. So the first one says, my first adjunct check was in 2011. I had a bachelor's degree and I taught one 16-week class. The pay for the course was $1,163.64. The next course I taught was an 8-week course and my pay was $1,103.56. The additional 8 weeks wasn't worth the $60. Now I only teach 8-week courses. So I think that's helpful, right? And I
Mhm.
think too, when you get into this, you should be gauging, what works for you and what doesn't work for you, right? You have to develop those preferences. But truthfully, you're teaching adjunct because, they may need you, they might have a need for you, right? So that's going to be up to you to decide if that's something that you're willing to accept and if not, if you're not willing to accept. So the next one says, my last adjunct check was $875 biweekly, resulting in a total compensation of $6,125 for the semester, January through April. This was for two classes. Is this decent or not? And I thought that was really a really good confession. I thought it was good.
Yeah, because it would all depend on, like, is this online or are you going to campus to teach? Like, that would be the question.
Okay, that's a good one.
Yeah, to determine if it's decent or not.
Right. If the lemon is worth the squeeze, right? I
Right.
always remember that you say that.
Yeah,
All right.
because if you gotta go to campus if the class is taught 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. That definitely makes a difference. Well, they didn't say, okay. Okay. The next one says, I'm a first-time adjunct and I have to admit the pay was less than I expected, but I didn't get into this for the money. Another thing is the frequency wasn't what I expected either. The community college that I'm teaching for has a per course rate, but they split it into payments. So if you're teaching a 16-week course, it's split into four payments. And if you're teaching an 8-week course, it's split into two payments. So that was just something that I didn't know.
Hmm.
So again, just knowing what to expect, right? So is it, and if you're a new adjunct, this might be a question that you didn't know you had to ask,
Mhm.
right? So it's helpful. Like now we're giving you guys the secrets, right? It's helpful to ask this in the beginning or before a course starts. Okay. So the next one says, I taught a 6-week or 8-week class and my pay was $996.45 for the semester. I never taught for that school again. But again, there's no additional context. So we don't know good, bad, online, in person, right?
Right.
If they were paying based on degree or if they were paying based on the number of students. So no additional context there. Okay. The next one says, my first adjunct position, I was paid 27.60 for an 8-week online class. I received a $250 stipend for new faculty training, and I was paid at the end of the course. So I thought that was a good one as well. All right. And then number 6 says, once I was hired at a for-profit school after submitting my application via Indeed. I was called the same day and the semester was starting within a week. All of the paperwork and training was done so fast. Once I was onboarded and added to the class, I realized it didn't have any content. I was stuck developing the course myself with no additional pay. Never again. So these are interesting. Those are really interesting confessions, and that's why we're sharing this because we're sharing things that we want you all to be aware of, so you know what questions to ask. And that's why we're here, right? That's why we have our mentoring group and support so that you can reach out and get help along the way, so you're not sucked into these type of positions and kind of fooled.
Right. And if I could add like a word of advice, so if you are teaching at your traditional community college or university, be prepared that you're going to have to build your course, right? Be prepared
Mhm.
for that. So you may not get money for that. You may not get a stipend for that. So you want to take that into account into your salary, right? But once you've built that course, you've got it. And you can, and if you teach that course again, then you have the materials and you can just copy it over. Because sometimes if the full-time faculty, especially like in gen ed, they may not share their course material with you, right?
That's a good point. Yeah.
And I'll tell you, I have another confession for myself because when I came to my current institution, I started out as an adjunct, right? It's a long story behind how I started out as an adjunct.
I don't think you've ever told me this.
But but long story short, like I was mortified when I had to like develop the course. I'm like, what? Like this is kind of ghetto. Like, because
Right,
my
right.
for-profits had me spoiled because like I said, they would put you in the course like a few days before class start to get familiar with it, but everything was done for you. So like I was spoiled. And so with my adjuncts now, I try to do that work for them because I want them to keep coming back.
That's right. Yeah, and right. Yeah, absolutely. And retain them, right? As we talked
Mhm.
about earlier, you want to retain them. All right, so we have some frequently asked questions. Do you mind if we role play really quick for these frequently asked questions?
Sure.
All right, I'll start by asking you a question and then you could ask me. But the first one that I have is, what should I look for when agreeing to accept a class?
Hmm. What should I look for when agreeing to accept a class? Um, I don't know necessarily look for, but I think the questions you need to ask is there any course development that I need to do? Um, do you have a copy of the syllabus? So at least you can see like the course description, the course objectives, the required textbooks. Let's see. That would be that would be what I think you should look for, because sometimes when agreeing to accept the class, it can be very formal or it could be very informal. It could be an email saying, "Hey, I have this class. Do you want to teach it? Yes or no?" Yes. Bam, you're in the class, right?
Right.
And then they leave you to figure out the finances or for you to see it when you get your check, right? Or
Right.
sometimes
Mhm.
it could be very formal. You get that email and then they give you a breakdown of your pay and all of that other stuff, right? So that's something you can look out for or ask about too, when agreeing to accept that class.
Okay, I like that. And for me, I look to see if it aligns with my schedule, right? What else
Mhm,
do I have going on? How soon is it going to start? How much time do I have to prepare? That textbook that she mentioned, right? Do I need to read this in its entirety, or can I just, stay a couple weeks ahead of my students? How soon can I get that? So, you know, there's some thinking involved there.
mhm.
Okay.
Okay, so how soon will you know, or how soon will I know what I'm getting paid for a class?
I mean, I felt like you just answered that, right? Sometimes it could be very informal where you may not know. They may not tell you, but it's up to you to go looking, right? Go to the HR website, go to the website, the college's website to look if they have a union, right? There might be a faculty union, there might be an adjunct union, there's going to be an agreement, right? That union agreement, refer to that. There is a section on compensation, right? Because that might outline it for you. So sometimes the pay isn't going to be crystal clear, depending on the organization that you work for. So you might have to do a little bit of legwork there. And then sometimes it will be. Like earlier, when I showed that example of the contract that I had in the portal, once you went into the portal, it told you everything that you needed to know to make an informed decision. And that's how I that's how I prefer, the opportunities to be, laid out for me.
Mhm.
So that can vary. All right. So another question, can I decline if it doesn't pay enough?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Definitely decline it if you feel like it doesn't pay enough or you don't think it's gonna be worth your time, you can definitely decline the,
Mhm.
pay.
We had that question actually came up in a Facebook group, and somebody was saying that they were worried about not being offered a class because they declined a class in the past. And personally, me, I never had that experience. The schools that I teach for, it's okay to decline a class. They'll ask you again the next semester. I don't know anyone who was, blackballed or anything like that just for saying no. A lot of schools do have a policy where you can go X amount of terms without teaching and still be active, I'm very similar to being like PRN at a hospital. So there's no difference there. So I would personally feel comfortable, if you can't do it right now, just say you can't do it because I would rather you say that than to show up and not do a great job. Or, you have things that come up or get in the way, or you aren't able to perform your best, and you're like, I knew I shouldn't have taken on this commitment. Yep.
Okay, so I think this is gonna our last frequently asked question. Are there any hacks for increasing my pay?
Yes, I think so. But it all depends for, like what you're looking for, right? So one of my favorite hacks is teaching the same class, right? I like teaching the same class or the same few classes so that I can combine my classes. You'll
Mhm,
have the option to merge them so you can teach multiple sections of the same course because as Dr. Copeman mentioned earlier, that preparation, it doesn't matter how many students you have to do that preparation regardless. So when you merge your classes behind the scenes, it just looks like you have one big one, right? So last semester I had four classes, but it was two of each class. So it felt like I only had two classes, and that worked for me because we're, the same due date, same schedule, you're the same announcements, you can copy paste, but when you merge them behind the scenes, you don't even have to copy and paste because both of your sections, they're seeing the same content. They're seeing the same, announcements and things like that. So to me, it just allows me to do the work once. That's what it feels like.
and to piggyback off of Dr. Sabri, you can do that across different or across multiple institutions. There was this one workshop I went to where an instructor, he was talking about hacking Canvas, right? But it's also a hack. Dr. Sabri is laughing because she was there, but you can also increase your income like this Like, if you're someone, maybe you teach a gen ed like English, right? English 101 or American literature or African American history. It's the same content, right? And especially if the institutions leave it to you to create the course
Yeah.
content. So what this person did was they used Google Drive, they used Google Docs, and that's how they built the course. And so they would allow access for those Google Docs to be shared across all of the courses across all these different institutions. And I think I have it correctly. That's how he did.
Yeah.
And so if he needed to make a change to a doc, maybe for this semester, that change went out across all of the courses, across all of the institutions.
Yeah. That was really clever.
So it was like teaching literally one class, one big old class.
Yeah. You
And
just
then
have a lot of students. Yeah.
right, and then you think the salary, the pay is gonna be different for each institution, and then probably the frequency of the pay is gonna be different. So this person could potentially, be earning a paycheck, you know, at the very most once a week, depending on the pay cycles,
Right.
or once
Right. It's
a month,
true.
at the
Yeah.
very least, once a month.
Right. Very true. Hmm. So there's a couple things you can do. And you might find like some institutions you're going to have a preference for, they're going to become your favorites. Or
Mhm,
like she mentioned, the pay cycles, you might hack the
mhm.
pay cycles, right? So you can be like, okay, well, I know if I want to achieve a certain thing or if I want to make a certain amount of money, I know I could pick up a class here and they won't overlap, right? Because maybe the semesters are off by a couple days, by a couple weeks, so you have some wiggle room there, or you have some time off only where you're doing one, and you only have a few weeks where they're overlapping. So there's a few different things that you could do to make it feel easier for you. So
And I think, if you teach gen ed, it's a little bit easier, right?
I
Because
think so too.
I'm in this
Hmm.
Facebook group and there's this lady, she's on the road to like making six figures as an adjunct, but
Wow.
she teaches math. And I think it's like college algebra.
Wow.
Well, there's only so many different college algebra platforms through the publishers, right?
That's true.
So
Hmm.
most institutions, they're using the same platform. And most courses, a lot of them, they're having the students do the work through the platform. It's just that their grades are just integrated into their
That's
learning
right.
system.
Right.
So there's very little grading that she has to do.
Wow. Okay. And you know what? It's funny that you say that because the very first course that I taught was medical terminology, right?
Mhm.
Medical terminology, and it was through the McGraw-Hill platform.
Yep.
So, and it makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense, and it's easy because, as you mentioned, most of the schools use the same thing, the same textbooks as well too. So, yeah, there's a couple different things that you can do. So, just
That
ask us, and
medical
we'll show you
terminology
how. Yeah.
medical terminology, McGraw or Caduceus, that was another popular one, and if
Yep.
you ever
Hmm.
Caduceus, after the first week, the heavy work is like the first week getting it set up, but after that,
Yep. Mhm.
there's nothing for you literally to do. So, especially
Right.
if you're in healthcare and you're looking to get into medical terminology, especially if it's an online class and if they're using Caduceus, yes.
Yeah, that's
You
true.
you
That's a good point.
basically are getting paid
Okay.
for that first week and the last week of class.
Well, I feel like we're giving them too many secrets. But
I know.
but But before we let you guys go, I just want to say that this was good and it was very insightful. But while salary is important, there's other benefits to being an adjunct, right? We sign up to be adjuncts because we have a flexible schedule. We can do it all online. We don't necessarily have to show up to an office. There is opportunity for professional development support, opportunities for growth and development, depending on where you're teaching. You might have opportunities for networking within the academic community, or just, the ability to build a community outside your normal place of business. You know, um, And there might be opportunities too for advancement or the advancement of your immediate family members. So I remember when I got into teaching, right? My husband ended up going to the school and getting a degree at the school. My stepson ended up going to the school. So knowing what benefits they offer could really help or enhance, your life, your family's life. So there's so much more to than just compensation. But thank you all for being here with us and for engaging in this conversation about compensation. Okay. So we are going to open it up for questions. All right. Any questions? You guys can unmute. You can type in the chat. All right. So before we let you guys go, we want to share this limited offer with you. We are excited to have another cohort of our Journey to Adjunct mentoring group. And it's going to start, the next one, it's going to start September, right? It's going to start in September. And in this mentoring group, we're going to have bi-weekly working sessions where we help you all create your teaching philosophy. We're going to talk about diversity statements and navigating DEI. We're going to give you live application assistance, interview prep, and more. And this package also includes a CV, right? So that you can easily apply for adjunct opportunities. So if you want to learn more about this program, you can email us at info@thequalifiedadjunct.com, or you can scan this QR code to be directed to our website where you can sign up and learn more about this package. And here is our contact information. Be sure to connect with myself and Dr. Copeman on LinkedIn. Or again, you guys have that email address. All right. Thank you guys so much for joining us.